Welcome back, Tradition Rewired listeners. And I'm here with my friend Stephen. Stephen, I still can't pronounce your last name.
Stephen Adubato.
Adubato. Okay, that's what I thought. How embarrassing. Should have checked before I press record. But thank you so much for joining me today on Tradition Rewired. It's been a long time since I've recorded something on this YouTube channel. And, we tried recording before for the Beyond Rome podcast on why you're not Orthodox. So I thought, let's just have this conversation and we can maybe have like a little spicy conversation, maybe something's quasi-inflammatory or inflammatory. I don't know. But this has been on my mind a lot, the difference between tradition, like authentic tradition, and traditionalism. And now that Cardinal Newman is going to be made a doctor of the church, the 38th doctor of the Catholic Church, I thought, maybe this is like another little prophetic prompt to have this conversation with you. So thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. I'm happy to be on.
Stephen, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself, besides the fact that you're part Armenian, which makes me really happy.
I grew up in New Jersey. My father's side is Italian. My mother's side is Greek. And yes, a little bit Armenian. I've told you before, I was baptized twice as a baby, which is canonically illicit, but my parents wanted to please both sides of the family. I mostly grew up in the Orthodox Church. Sometimes went to Catholic Mass, but my family, religion was mostly a cultural phenomenon for them more than anything. So I believe, but it wasn't like I wasn't super practicing. Right. But I was always a seeker. I was always asking very big questions about the nature of love, justice, beauty, suffering. And eventually I came to this point where I was like, I really want to know. I want to know who God is. Who is God for me? Can I have a real relationship with God? And ultimately, what does it mean to be part of a church? So, I really started searching in my undergrad years when I was in college. And, through grace, I ended up meeting people who really took my questions seriously, who took me seriously as a person and just wanted to get to know me and share life with me. And, after visiting lots of different denominations, I ended up deciding, there's something about the fact that the people who have helped me most are Catholic. And, I hadn't resolved all the theological questions about Orthodoxy and Catholicism, but I followed what was happening in my experience. And, what was interesting is that the more I entered deeply into my faith as someone in communion with Rome, it enabled me to appreciate the Orthodox tradition even more than I did when I was younger. Even though, again, I can't say I'm in communion with the Orthodox Church. I have a deep esteem for it and recognize how much God has used it in my own path to lead me closer to Him. So, I'm someone who really desires to see unity. I pray for it. I actively strive to foster it between all the churches, the Protestants included. And that's also why I studied theology. I teach theology and philosophy. I write about religion, culture, society. It's my main work. So that's a little bit of my own personal background.
Yeah, I feel such a kinship with you because I also grew up in an Orthodox and Catholic household. I was, as you know, a baptized Armenian Catholic and mainly a Catholic context because it was more practical, but also Orthodoxy as well. So it just, when you come from a Mediterranean background, it's not so clean cut. And I appreciate that you understand what that means because not everybody is super curious or cares that much about theology, or these kind of things, which in some ways, not always the worst thing. We want to, focus on Jesus and let Him sort out our material heresy, if not formal.
Yeah, that's the key in all of this. Really asking, how is Jesus calling me to be in relationship with Him? But also, how is He calling me to foster unity among all people, the common good? If He's not the center of all these theological debates, I think we're wasting our time.
Yeah, amen. And this is not flattery. I really mean this. I love everything of yours that I've read or listened to in Cracks in Postmodernity. It's so good, and you're so smart.
Well,
and when I
haven't read all of it then, because some of it is not.
Well,
Yeah.
I have trouble kind of keeping up with writers and bloggers, but if I faithfully followed anyone, it would be you, because I read you more than probably anybody else. But when you just, you're such a good writer and you word things so well, and I think you speak for a lot of us and just express it in a way you're like, yes, that's exactly what I was thinking, and I didn't even realize that's the depth of what where my thoughts were going. So I appreciate you so much. So thanks for doing all that. It's really good. And if you're listening and you haven't checked out Cracks in Postmodernity, you should. You're in for something very, very profound. One of your articles has, and I've used this so many times, Stephen, because I love the church, and I also, in a similar experience to yours, met people who really cared about my happiness and my destiny in a very gratuitous way. And the questions that I had about what does it mean to live the good life? What is the true, the good, the beautiful? What is my role in salvation history? And through that, so tradition and church tradition has been a real consolation for me. I think everybody has their thing that they really care about. And for me, it's like the church. And I love the church. And I feel like so much of our problems are problems of ecclesiology. And so this kind of I think it's important to like really clarify in the minds of Catholics the difference between like authentic tradition and traditionalism as an ideology. So this is something that you wrote. I'm going to read it from one of your articles. And I think it just explains things so well. This is what you say. But at the end of the day, traditionalism as a phenomenon in all of its iterations is inherently a major LARP. Paradoxically, it is a deeply modernist form of reactionary performance art that creates a fetish out of the past rather than appropriating the wisdom of tradition in a matter that fits the call of God in the present moment, which is the church's historic understanding of tradition. It quickly morphs into a form of paganism as its point of departure, as an ideology rather than as a response to God's call within one's given reality, end quote. So I love that. I use it all the time because of this confusion with this internet trend phenomenon of Catholic fundamentalists is what I call them, because I hate calling them trads because I don't want them to be confused with like actual tradition or like good trads. But I think Dr. Larry Chapp or Bishop Barron calls them tradicals. I don't know. I mean, we have to use what people use, but I would love for you to comment on that and what got you writing about it and thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can start by saying, like, when I entered full communion with Rome, once again, I was coming from the Divine Liturgy in the Greek Orthodox Church, which is, extremely beautiful and profound in part because, I mean, they really haven't changed the liturgy very much over hundreds of years. But also the nature of Eastern liturgy is very different from the West. Like, it's less mechanical, it's much more mystical, very poetic, Byzantine chant. I mean, I love Gregorian chant, but Byzantine chant, like, it's kind of, I mean, it uses some of the Arabic scales. So like there's something a little more captivating about it. And when I became Catholic again and I started going to regular masses at random parishes, like that was just a huge letdown after coming from the Divine Liturgy.
Yeah.
So I heard, because I was on Tumblr at the time and everyone was talking about Latin Mass. So I was like, all right, let me check this out. Sounds much closer to what I was experiencing at the Greek church. And what I saw was mostly very beautiful. Like, I loved the reverence, the ritual, especially, when Gregorian chant is done well, like, it's great. And this was back in 2013, I think, when I started going. And I started to see the ideological dimension to what was going on at the particular parish that I was going to. I saw it wasn't just like people who wanted to worship God in a beautiful way. Like, I saw that there was this sense that we must fight against, what's perceived to be this evil spirit overtaking the church, the spirit of modernity and the Novus Ordo Mass and modernism. And then, like the homilies, it was just clear to me that the priests were not really interested in helping us enter deeper into relationship with Christ. It was mostly pushing an ideological kind of agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And also just like the life of the community at the, again, I don't want to make it seem like every parish that celebrates Latin Mass is like this, but the sad thing is a lot of parishes and communities are like this, where again, there isn't this interest in like living communio, living, a shared life that's flourishing and abundant and like attractive to people, but it's very much like an ideological fortress. So then I was like, as much as I love this liturgy, I kind of feel the need to distance myself from
Yeah.
the ideological piece. And that's when I discovered, okay, I mean, first of all, not all Novus Ordo masses are said in an ugly way. Like, yeah, the problem is that when the council reformed the liturgy, it opened the door to a lot of dumb, ugly things. Like, it's easy to say a very sloppy Novus Ordo mass, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I
Right.
found, first off, like, I found parishes that have a strong ethnic identity tend to be more immune to
Mm-hmm.
that kind of pitfall. Like when I go to mass in Italian, where there's a big Italian community, Spanish mass, um, because the people understand that they're participating in a living tradition, which happens through their ethnic, cultural kind of background. I found that sense of participating in a living tradition changed the way that they approached the mass. It was no longer this dry or like kind of corny pandering kind of approach.
Silly. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was it was full of life and faith and reverence, and it was exciting. Like I don't know, like I saw that it was just different from the like typical suburban assimilated parish that I was going to. But also, I should mention, like I did start going to a Melkite church pretty frequently because, I was able to celebrate the Divine Liturgy in a way that was, in
It's a
community.
Greek Orthodox liturgy, but it's
It
Catholic.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah.
And again, also the same thing though, that like most of the people are Lebanese and Syrian. There's a strong sense of ethnic tradition as well. So like the point I'm trying to make is that when you live tradition in this sense of passing something down from one generation to the next, not only are you retaining the best of the past, it's also something living and dynamic because it's given to you by an actual human being. I'm not
Right.
reading a book from the medieval times and then creating my own tradition out of my reading. It's something being handed to me by another person in a context of a relationship. That's the big difference for me.
It is. And I think it can be confusing if you have all the traditional aesthetics, but then it's lacking, I would say, like the Holy Spirit, you could say. You can make that claim. Because I think
Yeah.
I am a survivor of like Southern California Catholicism
Yeah.
silliness. And I also went to the TLM briefly, actually around the same year, 2013.
Wow.
And I really love that parish. And I didn't pick up any bad spirits, but it was just it was just a place to go reverent. And then eventually, going back to my Eastern Catholic roots. But then what I notice sometimes in other spheres in the church is that you have the quote unquote orthodoxy, but without the Holy Spirit. So
Mhm.
without that relationship. And there's this like attachment, or use the word fetish, to the past. And that's what really, really concerns me, because from wherever you're standing, like, seminaries 30, whatever, 40 years ago, like if you were reading JP2 or Pope Benedict, you were like a right wing, crazy right winger,
Yeah.
and now if you're reading JP2 and Pope Benedict, others, or, you're like a liberal. And I don't know when that happened, so do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these terms that we use are so relative to the
Yes.
particular
Yeah.
context, the time we're in. Like I always use the example that Dorothy Day used to be called a radical communist lefty, and now and I always mention like when it comes to the church's moral teaching, she was very orthodox when it came to
Yeah.
sexuality, abortion, and now people would they would take someone who says that abortion and free love are bad and be like, oh look, a crypto fascist. So it's like these terms are so relative, but
Yeah.
anyway, I mean no, but to this point about again, it's like when tradition becomes an idol for its own sake that blocks out
Mm.
the Holy Spirit, yeah, I mean, we start veering into paganism,
Yeah.
not Christianity. And I think, and this is kind of getting into Newman, who I think we could also draw a parallel. Like we're both very familiar with Luigi Giussani's theology.
Hmm.
Both of them talk about the need to kind of look at the present through the lens of tradition, through the lens of the past. When we create an idol out of tradition, we don't do the work of adapting the acquired wisdom over the ages to the needs of the present time. And more importantly, to what the Spirit is calling us to do in the present time. Like if we're just creating this but if we're blindly following this idol of tradition, you're ignoring how the Spirit is asking you to adapt the tradition to what's happening in the world today.
Yeah.
And I think Newman really understood. And I have to say, like, I think Anglicans get a bad rap too much of the time. Like, sure, I mean, there are plenty of theological issues that Catholics may have with Anglicans, but I do think there's this insight that they have about the need to adapt tradition to the present day needs. And so I think, we have to thank the Anglicans for forming Newman in that way. But he
Hmm.
understood, like, okay, but ultimately, like the lack of a sense of like absolute, like moral absolutes in dogma in the Anglican Church. Like, yeah, there's something missing here. The Catholic Church has. So
Yeah.
anyway, the point is
Yeah.
like he understood that tradition needs to be in dialogue with the present, not for the sake of being progressive and open-minded, but because again, the Spirit is
It's the
constantly
truth.
asking.
Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
truth applied now. Yeah. And
Yes. Like
that
it's,
respects the nature of Christianity, which is an encounter with the
yes.
living God. Yeah. So,
Totally. And that's the key, a living God, not like an abstract, static understanding of God.
yeah. Or like a formula you apply to
Exactly.
your life and that's it. Are you at all? I know I occupy a strange little corner in the church. So I'm very happy about the religious revival, particularly among Gen Z men. But I'm also worried and concerned and prayerful because I just really hope that there is a love for. I feel that I'm Catholic
Mhm.
because of its prophetic nature, right? That it speaks
Yeah.
the tradition now, right? Um, but I worry sometimes that because of like the silly period, there's a reaction.
Yeah.
And are you at all concerned about that?
Very, very. And I'm getting more and more concerned as time goes on because I'm
Mm.
meeting these Zoomers who are like spending too much time on the internet in these trad chat rooms, and I'm seeing the consequences of this. And I have to, like, before I criticize, I do want to just say, like, I don't like when, especially like progressive lefty leaning Catholics, just wholesale dismiss these trads and you're like, oh, well, they're backwards and they're ignorant. And no, you can't dismiss people like that because there's a
Yeah.
true impulse behind this. Like there's a true frustration with an error that came before. And I'm going to
Right.
say this, I mean, with all charity and prudence, that like, I I think the late Pope Francis really saw that an issue was growing in the American church, and I'm afraid that his method kind of backfired. Like when he
Yeah.
tried to limit the Latin Mass. Again, I totally understand why he did it, but the same way he was very cautious, very gentle when reaching out to like, for example, people who feel alienated by the church's sexual teaching. He was very cautious, didn't change the teachings, but wanted to be like, hey, come back to church. We want to welcome you. We can work things out. We'll talk. When it
Yeah.
came to these trad communities, he's like, no, enough of you. This is all bad. And
Yeah.
I'm
He
like,
didn't extend that same kind of patience.
yeah, I think it would have been more effective. I think he would have accomplished his goal if he used that approach. But again, he's human. I love Pope Francis, so no shade towards him. But
Yeah.
but anyway, the point is, I get it, and I don't like condemning people drawn to Latin Mass. But you got to call a spade a spade. Like my fear is that because again, number one, it's reactionary. It's saying this progressive, loosey goosey kind of form of Catholicism was bad. Now we're going to swing the pendulum the other way and go to the other extreme. That doesn't work.
Right.
Reactionary. I mean, it never works.
It never works. It never
Yeah.
works.
But
Yeah.
it's also, again, it's like Christianity is first like living in a relationship with Christ, with the Holy Spirit, with the Father. And that comes through sharing life in a community. That means
Yeah.
not just reading books by yourself, not being in chat rooms. You got to be part of a living,
Touch the
communal
grass.
dynamic. And
Yeah.
that's where
Touch
the
the grass.
Spirit's going to reach you. So that's why I'm like, you reading these chat rooms and going into these ideological fortresses, like this isn't really Christianity. And it's not we're not going to serve the common good very much if that's how we're doing things. So, like, I'm
Yeah.
really praying for young people to find community, to find, especially for these boys, to find fathers, not
Right.
watching an influencer, a manosphere person on TikTok, but like a father who can help him grow and help him discover his vocation and serve other
Yeah.
people.
I'm glad you mentioned vocation because I was talking to some Zoomer girls who are going to some Catholic parties and they're hearing kind of anti-Semitic adjacent or flat out anti-Semitic
Yeah.
things, and they don't know. They're like, "What do we do?" And I'm like, "Well, maybe in some non-shamey, gentle way, you could say, you know, what's more attractive than blaming a whole group of people and all the problems of the world is you could follow your vocation and as a man."
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, it does, and it's strange. Like I think you said this earlier about there's like a Protestant, and again, I love my Protestant brothers and sisters,
Yeah.
and
Me too.
I'm like the token Catholic at Philos, but um, they pick and choose from the church fathers, and then like spew it out online without referring back to the living tradition. So when it was announced that Cardinal Newman was going to be declared a doctor of the church, I was so excited because I thought, well, first, of course, I love Newman, who doesn't?
Yeah.
But then my second thought, sadly, was, oh my gosh, I think that the Tratosphere, the Catholic fundamentalists, are like going to go after him now. And they did, because of his contribution to the development of doctrine,
Yeah.
So, yeah, any thoughts about that, or have you seen much of that out there?
Yeah, I haven't seen much of the reaction. And again, it's like I said about this kind of like the Anglican sensibility he was coming from. Like, of course, this emphasis on conscience is risky because it could
Yeah,
end up becoming pure relativism and self-referentiality. But again, like that's why Newman is so incredible, is because he saw the full picture of, conscience is being in relationship with the person who gave you your conscience in the first place. So there is this point
right.
of objectivity. But again, it's like if you treat tradition as an idol, you think conscience is a threat. And this is when we're not in Christianity anymore because Christ respected the freedom of each person he encountered. It didn't mean he said like it's a free for all, do whatever you want. Like there's an objective ideal he's handing us, he's inviting us to, but it's always going to have to involve our freedom. And if we don't do that, like we just compromise the whole gospel. So
Yeah,
but again, this is where I think like we have to pay attention to all our Protestant brothers and sisters. That like, yeah, I do fear that too often with Protestant theology, there's this risk of being too self-referential. But there's something about that the prophetic, charismatic spirit within a lot of Protestant denominations that like Catholics, especially trads, should be learning from.
yeah, and I think that's the sad reality of like a divided church is that, yeah, I think Protestants are blowing us out of the water when it comes to understanding like the prophetic dimension of the church of the world, the Holy Spirit. But yeah, we get my friend Jonna Schuster at Catholic Revival Ministry says, we get weird without each other. So we have to have the humility to
Yeah.
admit.
No, and I really value, I need my Protestant friends because they do have certain insights that most Catholics don't have, and also with Orthodox friends. So, this is why I'm very
Yep.
ecumenical. Um, but I mean, all this being said, I often write in my articles that I do think people need to pay closer attention, one, to these ethnic kind of Catholic communities, because
Mm-hmm.
especially at the way assimilation happens in the US, like they're always at risk of dying. And,
Yeah.
for example, in Jersey, in the Newark diocese, there's an Italian apostolate, which has been taken over by these young people who are like mostly grandkids of Italian immigrants, but they don't want to see their grandparents' traditions die, like, these saint feasts and the procession.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
to me,
Good
it's
for them.
beautiful to see that they're very devout, like truly Catholic people who see that their Italian culture is the vessel through which the faith was transmitted to them. So like that to me is a sign of hope. but also, the lay movements and the religious orders. Like, I think
Yeah.
they do an excellent job of integrating, the objectivity of tradition with this charismatic prophetic spirit, paying attention to how the spirit's moving in the world today. Like, there doesn't seem to be this difficulty of integrating all of
Right.
it within the lay movements and the religious orders. So I think we should keep our eyes on them. We should look for ways to participate in them because
Right.
they kind of have it all together in the package.
I don't know if I told you, I don't think I did tell you this, but this summer I was at the Armenian Catholic Eparchal meeting. So all these Armenian Catholic Gen Zers and the liturgy. So I never hung out with the Jersey Armenian Catholics before, but the liturgy
Yeah.
was, oh my gosh, it was Armenian and English and Arabic. It was
Yeah.
so cool. And I rarely get to see that. And so that was really, really neat. They're speaking English together and Armenian and Arabic. I thought, oh my gosh, these are my people. This is my tribe.
Yeah.
And then this is so funny. They the mass ended with "How Great Thou Art," and I was laughing because that's not a Catholic or Eastern song. I'm like, only in America and only in New Jersey. But then it was "How Great Thou Art" sung in Arabic.
Oh, really? Oh, I would
Yes.
never imagine. That's hilarious.
So what's that? Wait, what'd you say?
That's I never would have imagined.
I could never. I was like, this is like now we've entered in like Egypt or Syria, Armenia, and America. And it's just so hilarious. So I got a kick out of that. Now, if someone's like listening and goes, well, Stephen, I kind of see what you're saying with like traditional versus like traditionalism, but how is that paganism? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, so that article you were referencing had to do with a recent iteration of like trad Catholicism within certain like artsy literary scenes in New York. That's, I mean, kind of dying out right now. But within the scene, there was a much more pagan energy, and I mean literally, because like a lot of people were mixing it with Nietzsche, which with like astrology and this kind of like, I don't know.
So even more than the kind of like the self-referential, individualistic worship.
Yeah, like I think like the trad parishes, I wouldn't apply the pagan. I think there's something very like individualistic, modernistic about the kind of spirituality at those parishes. But when I say paganism, I'm talking about a particular phenomenon that sprung up in New York in the last 5 years, which is kind of dying out now, so it's not as much an issue. But yeah, again, this sense of like worshiping myself, worshiping my interpretation. Like, again, it's veering away towards like actual monotheism.
Yeah. And you got this, because I'm trying to make this episode as spicy as possible.
Yeah.
But you got in trouble for talking about this. Can we hear about that? And good job standing by what you think and right. I'm with you.
I mean, it's funny because I started writing. Disclaimer, like I write for all different kinds of publications. Like I don't really care what their bent is. If they want to, let me say what I have to say, then I'm good with it.
Yeah.
So I started writing for National Catholic Reporter because my friend Tara Isabella Burton wrote in the New York Times about, how Latin Mass and traditional Christianity in the Catholic and Anglican churches was kind of growing back in 2020. They published a response by an older Catholic, which I thought was just like dismissive of young people's experience. So I was like, could you let me defend myself and my friends? So they were open to it. I wrote another piece about, it was after Pope Francis put out the motus proprio, kind of restricting Latin Mass. And I kind of pointed out the fact that like a lot of liberal Catholics will paint Latin Mass as this like closed-minded, exclusionary thing. But I was like, well, you have a lot of people who identify as neurodivergent, a lot of people who consider themselves sexual minorities. Like it's a space for people who don't always fit in normal Mass. So like be careful to use this typical liberal argument.
Yeah.
So like the liberals got mad about that. And then this most recent one in January, I was like, okay, I mean, we got to really look at the fact that there's something very modernistic about what's become of the trad movement. So then the trads got mad. So like they were on Twitter saying all these things. And I was like, guys, I defended you twice in this publication. You never thanked me, but now you're jumping on me. So it's a little bit hurtful. I said one critical thing, but everything else I said was out the window. So no, I was trolling them. I was joking around. But I mean, you know what I
Good for
will
you.
say though, that one young guy did write an article, like a very well thought out full essay critiquing my work. And, I didn't fully agree, but I was like, you know what, I see your point. So I DM'd him and I was like, hey, I read your article. I appreciate what you said. If you ever wanted to talk about it, I'm open. So, if someone's gonna attack me in a stupid way, like I'm gonna troll them, I'm gonna make a joke. But
Right.
if you have like a genuine critique that's thoughtful and charitable, like I'm always open to hearing people's thoughts and I'm open to being corrected too. So, try
That's
to
so
balance
beautiful,
it out.
Stephen. I think that's like a very much needed in the church right now. A lot of patience. I think Newen would be happy about this. The idea of university. I mean, we all need to be corrected, to have our consciences formed, to be humble, and to like journey together. But social media doesn't always. It doesn't really. It's not conducive to
No.
that. But
But we're
and that.
called to go against the grain. We're called to
Yeah.
look to create those bridges and have those conversations, not to
Yeah.
hide in our little silos.
Yes, or echo chambers. So,
Yeah.
tell us what you're up to now, and any final thoughts that you would love to share with our listeners.
Mm, well, what am I going to tell our listeners? Yeah, I think that if you love Latin Mass, I think you should go. If it helps you spiritually enter in communion with Christ, go. And I would look for ways to look for how the Spirit is calling you to expand the beauty you see in the liturgy beyond the walls of the church. So, how is He
Mm-hmm.
calling you to begin charitable initiatives, cultural initiatives, and again, like to integrate whatever, again, cultural, ethnic traditions of your fellow parishioners. Like, just pay attention to what the Spirit is asking of you. And, but yeah, I am just going to drive home this like ethnic Christianity point. Like, if you have a saint
Yeah.
feast or a church festival in your area, you should go because we need to keep those things going. We can't let those things die out because it's too precious of a tradition to lose.
Yeah, and it is like we need the universal through the particular. So that's where the ethnic, cultural things come
Especially,
in.
especially the Arabic church festivals, like the Malachite one. They always have the best food and the music. It's a great time. So, I mean, we gotta
What do
support.
you mean you don't eat no meat?
On the Greek festivals too, of course, gotta go to those. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Well, yeah, and when Catholics who are of a Jewish background who go to the traditional Latin Mass reach out to me, I'm like, oh, this is it. It's you guys more than anybody have to like help keep the church normal and authentically
Yeah,
traditional.
because
So
when you look at the Jewish tradition, you can see it. Like the Seder is a religious and a cultural ritual. The food, the prayers, the singing, all of it. Like,
well, it's
lots
so
of living
interesting to
history.
me, like because of the uptick in anti-Semitism being primarily in those corners,
Yeah,
the traditional Latin Mass is more Hebraic than the Novus Ordo. So
yeah, that's the thing. When you
it's
really
just kind of
look
funny.
at it. Yeah,
Anyways, well, thank you so much, Stephen. It is always a pleasure to talk to you.
no, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Stephen.